Okay. Yeah, Martin, welcome to Vila do Conde,
Thank you.
Portugal. It's nice to have you here on the 20th IRI conference. You're going to talk this afternoon, but I just had a few questions to warm up questions, if you like. Just to say, I'm Mark Durden, right, and know Martin's work for quite some time, and I just got a few questions from a writer's perspective, a critic's perspective, and thoughts. Maybe provocations. The work that I want to begin with, and I want to think about the context, and you've probably been asked it a lot, and the work that still probably fascinates me, for good and bad, is Last Resort, which was taken, photographs that were taken in, in the mid-80s, in colour, with a plough-bell camera, which is a film-based camera, 6x7.
Correct.
Yeah, 120 roll film.
And flash.
And flash. I want to ask you about that in terms of influence. And was that, and maybe I'm wrong here, wasn't that was your breakout moment, wasn't it? The breakout work for you? Or maybe for the public?
I guess it really was my breakout project. Yeah. It was shown in Liverpool, and no one really was bothered about it because people know what New Brighton is like.
Yeah.
And then this same show went to the Serpentine in London, and a lot of people were very critical of the pictures.
Yeah,
They were saying,
I remember.
How dare this middle-class photographer come and exploit the working classes? And it became quite a controversy. You have to remember, though, that my motive was slightly political insofar that New Brighton was really shabby, it was really down at heel, and yet still people came there because they were used to going to New Brighton for a day trip with the kids. So I photographed the families and the children with this shabby backdrop, and that really, if you like, was a political point behind the images. So I'm very happy that people spotted this, and it's interesting that although I did this in the mid-80s, it's still, it's still the work that people remember me for, which is a bit depressing because it must imply that since then I've gone downhill. But I'm very happy that I have got one project that people recognise, and we're on the sixth edition of the book, and it still keeps selling, and it's still my most popular book, even though I've done another 100 since then.
So it must be
I'm very happy to have that one popular book anyway.
In terms of influence then, and that turn to colour, you had the influence, and you've spoken about this, of John Hind. But there are other influences I wanted to ask, but maybe just say a little bit about John Hind, and because one of the things that struck me about the photographs, I've seen them in the book, but I saw them exhibited a few years ago, they returned to New Brighton. New Brighton is in the northwest of the UK, and it's not far from Liverpool. It's over the River Mersey. And I live nearby. The New Brighton that I see is very different to the New Brighton that you photographed in the mid-80s under Margaret Thatcher. But I was interested in the aesthetic and the form of the pictures. I mentioned the camera, the plough bell, which allowed great detail. But of course, one of the characteristics of it, and maybe the strangeness of the pictures at that time, was the use of colour, and intense colour. Some you might even say lurid colour. And that was because, I might say that, and because of the flash as well. The flash was supplementing and heightening the photographic representation, and I was struck by that. More in the print quality. It's in the book, but there's something about the print as well that, for me, brought that out, and that detail. So a bit more about that, and John Hind.
There's a few things that influenced me, as well as John Hind, is also the emergence of photographers in America in the late 70s, and they suddenly were getting museum slots. So it told us that colour photography could be serious. As well as John Hind, who came into Butlins and photographed there. I was a photographer at Butlins, and I was working in black and white. And I saw his pictures, and I thought, well, hey, these are much better than mine. The colour of the surroundings, the clothes that people were wearing. So it gave me confidence to think about, changing from black and white to colour. And also the introduction of this new camera meant that you could get a really good, sharp picture, and therefore the files were very big and they would blow up and look really terrific. A bit like the Hind, insofar that Hind also used flash, albeit bulb flashes, so you wouldn't see it so dramatically as it was in my pictures. And I guess they're the things that all came together at once and give me the confidence to change from black and white to colour. And that would have been, as you say, around 1982. And I was living near to New Brighton, on Egremont Promenade. It was literally less than 2 kilometers away. And I would go down there every day at the weekend and just photograph. And I knew I was onto something. You know, you always know when you're a photographer and you find the key for the work to progress, and that's always very exciting.
What about the title?
Well, the
Last
title.
Resort.
Yes, the title really sums it all up. You know, it was a grim place. And you're absolutely right, you know, insofar it's changed now. I went back last summer. We were doing some filming for a film that someone was making about me. We went back to New Brighton. You couldn't see any litter at all. You know, it had really cleaned itself up. So it's changed, probably for the better, but in terms of photography, it's very difficult now to take a picture with the same underlying strength because the conditions have changed.
And you mentioned litter before, and the title, Last Resort, suggests it's a pun as well, a holiday resort, but a last resort is the end of something, isn't it? The last resort. A sense of desperation. And yet, yes?
Slightly derogatory title.
Yes, it is. And I was thinking where it came from, because round about the same time, you had another defining book, not by you, but by Paul Graham, in colour, called Beyond Caring. And in a way, for me, those two books define a particular moment that, I don't know, you could say are political in the sense that they register a kind of extreme state, but a real state of Britain at that time, under Margaret Thatcher.
That's right. I mean, Paul did 3 very important books in the 1980s, and he self-published these. Back in those days, we weren't able to get publishers, so we were able to get a grant from the Arts Council, and that meant we could get these books out. And with the benefit of hindsight, I guess, my book and the Cost of Living book I did and Paul's 3 ones were very much influential in that decade. And it really established colour documentary photography as being something to be taken seriously. And interestingly, in the next, this same month, there will be an exhibition at the Tate Gallery in Tate Britain of photography from the 80s. And I think both Paul and I will be in that. And it'll be a very good moment for us to look back on the 80s and what happened there and to show the different types of work that emerged, including what we call the plough-bell generation. There are other photographers who had plough-bells too, like Jem Southam, Graham Smith, Chris Killip, all working in medium format. So it was a very influential time. And that's why we're called the plough-bell generation. I don't know if you've heard that expression before.
No? Well, we have now.
You have now, exactly.
The plough-bell generation,
Yeah, we have it on film as well.
Great.
Very good.
Okay, I'm being soft about class as well in some ways, but I think I just want to go back and then we'll move forward because I'm not sure how much time we have and I could go on, and I'm sure we could talk more. We started with Last Resort. I'm interested in the problem of maybe of class and difference. You raised it because you said you're a middle-class photographer. You're cross-class looking, as someone put it. I think Paula Rabinovitz about documentary. You said that your work was criticised. Was it criticised in Liverpool and London, or both? I'm interested in that reception because I'm a little bit younger than you, well, quite a lot actually. I remember the reception as a student in the 80s, and that was like, I was a fine art student, and that work, well, there was a critical reception of it, and that was to do with an inherent problem I felt then with documentary, about the gap between the photographer and the subjects.
So you're saying, let me get this straight, you're saying that it's a problem to have a middle-class photographer photographing the working class. Is that right?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the reception of the work was critical because of
Only,
the way
not
in
in
which...
Liverpool, though. Not in Liverpool.
That's what I'm asking. It was in London, not in
Exactly,
Liverpool. That's an important distinction.
Well, in Liverpool, everyone knows what New Brighton's like, so there's no great shock to anyone. While as London audience wouldn't know. They haven't been up north. They haven't been to New Brighton. They don't know. They're far-fetched from the poverty that was going on in the north of England. And it was news to them, and they blame me for showing them it.
Okay, and that's why you see it's political, it's giving visibility to something that the Southerners, in some senses, were not aware of. Okay.
But what I'm curious to know more about is, we're talking about the last resort, but you say you have a problem with it. You haven't explained properly what your problem is.
I have the problem, the problem could be seen to be that was the way, and a number of people voiced it, Margaret Thatcher saw the working class, was the way in which they were depicted in the pictures
So it looks as if I'm a Thatcher photographer, is that right?
That was a comment that somebody made, yes.
Philip Jones Griffiths.
Did no, a good guess, but not quite. Anyway, but...
Well, he made that as well.
Did he?
Yes.
Yeah.
He led
and you shifted class in terms of your subject matter?
But I'm very democratic about all classes.
Okay.
I mean, one of the things that inspired me to do the middle classes was because of the criticism of me photographing the working classes. I also felt that the middle classes weren't represented in the world of documentary at all. And back in those days, it's probably different now. You could find images from that class. Certainly in the UK, you couldn't find any pictures about the middle classes. So I felt it was a gap that needed to be filled. I'm also middle class myself. I moved to Bristol, a very middle class sort of city. I photographed there and in Bath, even more middle class. And in fact, since then, I've done work around the establishment, which is looking really at the upper classes. So I'm very democratic about where I go in terms of class and how I represent them. I think that's quite important.
I just have I have one question about common sense. Common sense shifted in the sense that it was a global vision to a certain extent.
Yes. So
could you say something about that?
So in 1995, I decided to experiment with a camera which is called, well, it was a Nikon, in fact, and it had what's called a ring flash and a macro lens. This is usually associated with medical photography. And I started photographing all kinds of things, whether food, cliches from different countries, and all these pictures came together into a project called Common Sense, which was launched in the spring of '99. And at that time, we had, I think, 45 different exhibitions around the world of these images, and we made these laser prints courtesy of Xerox, who actually, they're very stable. These were made in '95, and we've got a lot of them, seeing no fading whatsoever. And we sent this set of 250 or 350 images to different galleries, and we said to them, no cost, just put it up how you like. The only condition is that you send us installation shots of how you've displayed the work. And that's what's happened. And it's interesting now that 25 years later, it's good to have another look at this project, because I think you can see other influences there, not only ones that I took on board, but of course other people who've looked at my images and found inspiration in those as well. So it was a very good opportunity at Paris Photo this year to have a good look back at this particular project.
Is there an interesting continuity between Last Resort and Common Sense? In terms of, on the one hand, you've got the kind of, you talked about litter, but you've got holidaymakers, you've got a form of consumerism. And in a way, doesn't it intensify? Is that what happens, do you think, in terms of the global portrait that is offered in Common Sense?
Well, yes, Common Sense was also a critique of society, but the subject of consumerism was something else I did in the 80s. I went to supermarkets, I went into places like Marks and Spencer, and since then, of course, I've also done a project very much about consumerism, which is really about tourism. And we all have this expectation of what a tourist resort will look like, especially if it's a famous one, and we get there and we find that all these other people are trying to do the same thing as you, and therefore what you can do in tourism is highlight the difference between the reality of a place compared to the mythology. And that's the sort of basis of taking that work forward. And that's also something that always, I guess, in a sense, is overseeing my whole genre, because my big subject is to look at the sort of leisure pursuits of the middle classes in the Western world. I think it's an important subject. Many other people in Magnum, for example, will go to wars and famines and photograph these things. But I think the front line is as much on the supermarket as it is on a war, despite the fact that the current wars are totally unnecessary and absolutely horrific.
Good.
Well, a thing to that.
No, we're not going to quite. Can we have one more question?
Of course you can.
Yeah.
You have my permission.
Fine. Sentiment. Would you say that your photographs lack sentiment? And that goes back to also a critic maybe of your view, your Thatcherite view of the working class that not just Philip Jones Griffiths, but a number of other photographers might raise. And it's to do with that assumption of a lack of sentiment, perhaps, in some of the
I think
these two bodies of work.
I think it's a mistake to read the work like that. I mean,
that's fine.
One thing you've got to be, if you're a documentary photographer, you've got to like people.
Yeah.
And I like people, but I'm not afraid of creating a critique about the society in which we live, which inevitably has to show people. And I think you can look at these pictures and you can see, to me, it's quite clear that there is a relationship, there's an affection for these people that I'm photographing. Because as much as anything, I'm photographing myself. You know, I photograph the things, you know, I go to supermarkets, I go on tourist locations, I'm sitting in a nice hotel, I'm getting on a flight, doing all the things that ultimately I'm critiquing. So you could argue it's a very good example of hypocrisy. And I quite like the idea of being a hypocrite from the accusation. I mean, there is something fundamentally that you don't like in my work, and I find that interesting, actually. And
you're right.
You're maybe saying it's the lack of emotion, lack of sentiment. I don't know if sentiment's the right word. But,
I don't know, I threw it in there to provoke a little bit, to dig, because I'm interested in it. And partly because of, and we could go on, but partly because of my friendship with Tom Wood, and I do see a difference in the characteristic of the pictures Tom Wood exhibited alongside you during Last Resort. And I see a difference in the kind of maybe the kind of pictures that result.
Mm-hmm. Well, Tom
and maybe that he's not a satirist in that sense, and maybe it's to do with if it's a satire of humanity.
Well, I think that's an element of it. You're right. You know, there's less of that in Tom's work, but it's still there. You know, you could argue. I'm sure if Tom was here, he would say, "Yes, I have politics too." Look at the work, and you can see that.
Yeah.
So yes,
it
takes. I like the fact
politics.
We have different voices, and you know, ultimately, we found a way to express that, and that's that's an achievement that most photographers don't end up doing.
Well, no, I respect that. Great. Thank you for your time.
Okay.
Thanks.